Welcome to the CDA Institute's Geopolitical Update. I'm Josh Malm, Director of Research and Analysis for the Institute, and I'm joined by geopolitical expert Joseph Varner, Deputy Director of the Conference of Defense Associations and former Director of Policy for the Minister of National Defense. In this podcast, Joe will provide his analysis and insights on the most significant geopolitical and international security developments of the week. So grab your headphones and get ready for a concise but comprehensive update on the world's most pressing geopolitical issues. The CDA Institute encourages rigorous debate on national security matters through our events, research, and publications. Joe, great to be with you again for the Geopolitical Update. Can you provide our listeners with a brief overview of what's been happening on the global stage this week? What are the key highlights and trends that we should be aware of before we get into more specifics?
Three stories this week that are of particular interest are North Korea's failed missile launch, the current state of Russia's Ukraine war, and the increasing tensions in the Middle East between Israel and Hezbollah.
Thanks, Joe. Why don't you touch on North Korea's missile launch and what's happening inside the Hermit Kingdom this week?
So on Wednesday morning, to protest the arrival of a U.S. aircraft carrier in South Korea and Japanese, South Korean, and U.S. war games, North Korea carried out a test of what was at first believed to be a hypersonic missile. The missile was launched local time at about 5:30 a.m. and was traveling off the North Korean east coast. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said that the projectile flew about 155 miles before exploding in flight. Missile fragments were reportedly scattered in the waters up to 250 kilometers from the launch site near North Korea's capital. But in fact, North Korea claims now that it tested a multi-warhead missile in the first known launch of a developmental weapon system geared to overwhelm U.S. and South Korean missile defenses. And North Korea's state media said the launch tested the separation and guidance control of individual mobile warheads to ensure the capability of the multiple independent reentry vehicles, or MIRV. It said the separate warheads were guided correctly to the three coordinate targets, and a decoy that separated from the missile was verified by radar. South Korea and their Joint Chiefs of Staff said that the separation of warheads in MIRV tests happens in descending stages. What that means is that in this case, the North Korean missile exploded in the initial stage of flight. So some analysts have said that the launch vehicle is similar to a liquid fuel Hwasong 17 ICBM, while others maintain that it was the solid fuel Hwasong 16 intermediate range ballistic missile. And during the launch, more smoke was detected than normal, which suggests a possible issue caused by an engine fault or with the propulsion system. And there's also evidence that the test flight suffered from stabilization faults in what likely is to be the first of many tests of this new MIRV nuclear system by North Korea.
Thanks, Joe. It would be great to get an update on the Ukraine war and what the situation on the ground looks like.
In terms of the overall Ukraine war, we are in day 853 since the February 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine, and it's still a stalemate. Ukraine is not winning this war at this point, nor is Russia. And NATO cannot afford to stand back and see Ukraine lose the war as its credibility is on the line. But NATO cannot stand back and see Russia forced to resort to nuclear weapons either. Numbers remain stacked in Russia's favor as we are in a deep attrition phase of the war, and Russia's manpower pool is 4 times higher than Ukraine. And for Ukraine to have a chance in a war of attrition, it must have a casualty rate of probably about 4 times lower than that of Russia, and we're not seeing that. Russia currently holds the initiative along the front and continues to bolster its forces and batter its way into fortified Ukrainian cities that guard its eastern frontier. And Russian forces in the war have sustained an estimated 400,000 to 500,000 casualties, both dead and wounded. And it's believed that Russia has lost an estimated 150,000 to 180,000 dead. As well, an estimated 8,000 Russian tanks, 15,000 armored vehicles, 14,000 artillery pieces have been destroyed, damaged, or captured. And on top of that, Russian forces have lost somewhere in the neighborhood of 29 warships and boats and 680 planes and helicopters. Ukraine has lost an estimated 70,000 killed and 120,000 wounded, but I think almost everyone believes that those numbers have been lowballed. Ukraine is nowhere near achieving its war aims of retaking its lost territory, including Crimea, and Russia has not achieved its maximalist war aims of seizing the entire country and destroying Ukraine. The war remains a stalemate weighted at this point in Russia's favor.
Thanks, Joe. Now to a topic that has been reoccurring in our program, tensions in the Middle East, Israel, and Hezbollah. What's your take?
The Israel Defense Forces continue their clearing operation effort in the Gaza Strip, particularly around Rafah and the Hamas Rafah Brigade, which has taken a considerable mauling at the hands of the Israeli military. Having said that, Hamas has shown signs that it is attempting to reconstitute its forces within the Gaza Strip and to eliminate any local competition that might form government or be inclined to peace with Israel. It recently killed 2 tribal leaders that it feared would side with Israel in forming an alternative government for the area. But it appears now that one of those tribes is actually striking back at Hamas, and that suggests that they no longer fear the consequences of challenging the terrorist group, in a sign that Hamas may be losing its power and its power may be waning. Israel said that it is finishing up the intense phase of its campaign in Gaza and is preparing to move north to deal with Hezbollah. And Hezbollah and their Iranian masters continue to strike northern Israel and threaten war. Iran's proxy militias in the Yemenis Houthis, Iraq in the Islamic resistance, Syria and Hezbollah seem increasingly prepared to widen the war. And the U.S. efforts to deter the Houthis and Iranian militias in Iraq have been a failure. And Jordan seems to be increasingly at risk of facing an Iranian-backed insurgency. Iran, for its part, has increased its capability and its capacity, and likely is in its enrichment of uranium for its nuclear weapons program that its leaders talk about but claim does not exist, and is on the threshold, theoretically, of being able to produce nuclear weapons, something the United States and its allies have promised Israel would never happen. And Iran has already moved outside its longstanding military doctrine to strike Israel militarily from its own territory. The U.S. has cautioned both Iran and Hezbollah if the war widens, there will be little they can do to restrain Israel, and that they will even be forced to aid Israel if it turns to all-out war. Israeli Defense Minister Gallant has warned the greatest threat to the future of the world is Iran, and the time is running out. Now is the time to materialize that commitment of America and American administrations over the years, the promise to prevent Iran from possessing nuclear weapons. And in perhaps a sign of things to come, a U.S. B-1 bomber was sighted over the Mojave Desert, armed with the new GBU-72 Advanced 5K Penetrator GPS-guided bomb, which is designed to smash through reinforced concrete and destroy underground facilities, like Iran has for its nuclear program, with a circular error probable of just 5 meters, which is good for a hardened target kill. So more on this to follow.
Joe, thanks again. What else do you think would be pertinent for people to be watching for the rest of this week and looking ahead to next week?
China has spent the last week carrying out amphibious drills in the South China Sea and air and sea incursions into the territory of Japan around the Senkaku Islands that China claims as their own. Be prepared to see China engage in further provocations with the Philippines, Vietnam, South Korea, and Japan, not to mention Taiwan, with gray zone tactics, those tactics that are short of the threshold of war, especially as the U.S. elections draw ever near. So November is coming, and it looks like people will be out to push the Biden administration in a negative way, and it's something to watch over the next several weeks. So watch and shoot.
Joe, thank you as always for your insightful analysis and for guiding us through this week's geopolitical developments. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to join us next week as we reconvene with Joe to delve into another week of global affairs. Thanks again.